Chapter 1. Cleopatra VII, Queen of the Nile. In the golden warmth of the Egyptian dawn, where the waters of the Nile curled through the land like a thread of silk, a queen once reigned, whose name would echo for more than 2,000 years. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was born into a world of opulence and danger, beauty and betrayal. The year was 69 BCE, and though she came into the world in Alexandria, the intellectual and cultural heart of Egypt, her lineage was not native to the land. Cleopatra descended from the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek rulers who had held Egypt since the days of Alexander the Great. Though she was Macedonian by blood, she would come to be seen as a true daughter of Egypt, not because of her birth, but because of her spirit. From an early age, Cleopatra was different from her siblings and the courtiers who surrounded her. She was curious, intense, and disciplined. In a time when women, even royal women, were often denied advanced education, she studied deeply. Mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, medicine, all flowed through her eager mind. More impressively, Cleopatra was a linguist of exceptional talent. Ancient accounts suggest she spoke at least 9 languages fluently, including Egyptian, which none of her royal ancestors had bothered to learn. She spoke to her people not as a foreign ruler, but as one of them. In a palace of marble columns and sun-dappled gardens, she listened, watched, and learned. At the age of 18, Cleopatra ascended to the throne beside her younger brother Ptolemy. As was customary, they were declared joint monarchs, and by dynastic tradition, husband and wife. Yet theirs was no partnership of equals. Cleopatra quickly took the reins of power, placing her own image on coins and issuing edicts in her name alone. Her independence, however, stirred opposition. Palace officials loyal to her brother conspired to remove her, and within a few short years, Cleopatra found herself exiled from Alexandria, wandering the edges of her own kingdom. But exile was not defeat. In the quiet of that forced retreat, Cleopatra sharpened her strategy. The moment that would change everything arrived in 48 BCE, when Julius Caesar sailed into Alexandria in pursuit of his rival, Pompey. Egypt, still a wealthy kingdom, was embroiled in civil strife. Cleopatra saw in Caesar not just a Roman general, but a force strong enough to help her reclaim her throne. According to legend, and ancient writers often favored drama, Cleopatra had herself rolled into a carpet and smuggled into Caesar's private chamber. When the rug was unrolled before him, she appeared, graceful and unbowed, dressed in silks and scented with lotus and myrrh. Whether or not the tale is literal, what's undeniable is that her meeting with Caesar marked the beginning of her return to power. Caesar, captivated by Cleopatra's intelligence and wit, supported her claim. With his military backing, she entered Alexandria once more, triumphant. Her brother drowned in the Nile under uncertain circumstances during the ensuing conflict, and Cleopatra once again ruled, this time, nominally with her even younger brother Ptolemy XIV, but in practice, alone. She bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy the Philopator, Philometor. Caesar, known to history as Caesarion. His paternity, while claimed by Cleopatra, was never officially acknowledged by Caesar, yet she held him up as a living symbol of alliance between Egypt and Rome. For a time, Cleopatra lived in Rome, housed in a villa near the Tiber. She was not a queen in exile, but a sovereign guest, attended by servants, scholars, and nobles. Her presence, however, unsettled the Roman elite. Cleopatra was regal in a way they had never known. Confident, intellectual, adorned in Egyptian gold, and unapologetically foreign. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, the political landscape darkened. Cleopatra swiftly returned to Egypt, wary and watchful, with her son in tow. But peace would not last long. New power players rose in Rome, and among them was Mark Antony. Mark Antony, one of the triumvirs now ruling Rome, summoned Cleopatra to the city of Tarsus to explain her loyalty. Cleopatra, understanding the power of spectacle, arrived in grandeur. Ancient chroniclers describe her arrival on a golden barge with purple sails, attended by servants dressed as sea nymphs, while she herself reclined beneath a canopy, adorned as the goddess Isis. It was theater, yes, but also diplomacy. Antony, known for his love of drama and excess, was enthralled. Their meeting sparked not only a political alliance, but a deeply passionate romance. Antony followed Cleopatra back to Egypt, where they lived and ruled in mutual splendor. Their union was not simply romantic, it was deeply strategic. Antony saw in Cleopatra an ally who could provide funds, troops, and legitimacy for his ambitions. Cleopatra saw in Antony a protector for herself and her son, as well as a means to secure Egypt's independence against Roman expansion. Together, they had 3 children, and Cleopatra was named Queen of Kings, with Antony declaring Caesarion as Caesar's rightful heir. These actions enraged Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and future Augustus. The clash between Octavian and the Antony-Cleopatra alliance became inevitable. Octavian's propaganda painted Cleopatra as a dangerous enchantress who had bewitched a Roman nobleman. He claimed Antony had abandoned Rome for the East, for the arms of a foreign queen. While some Romans viewed her with suspicion, many in Egypt saw Cleopatra as a true pharaoh, divine, wise, and rightful. She took part in religious ceremonies, revived old traditions, and commissioned grand temples. Her reign was one of both elegance and diligence. But beyond her palace, the war drums were beginning to sound. The decisive confrontation came in 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, a naval engagement off the coast of Greece. Cleopatra commanded part of the Egyptian fleet alongside Antony. Despite their numbers, they were outmaneuvered by Octavian's admiral, Agrippa. The battle turned against them, and amid the confusion, Cleopatra's ship retreated. Whether she fled strategically or impulsively remains debated. But Antony followed her lead. Their forces crumbled. The defeat marked not just the fall of their alliance, but the final unraveling of Cleopatra's hopes for an eastern counterbalance to Roman power. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra fortified her capital, hoping for a diplomatic solution. She sent emissaries, appealed to reason, but Octavian was relentless. Antony, hearing false reports of Cleopatra's death, fell upon his own sword. Mortally wounded, he was brought to her, and died in her arms, a scene immortalized in countless retellings. Cleopatra, left alone, knew what would come next. Octavian would take her prisoner, parade her through the streets of Rome, as a spoil of war. But Cleopatra, proud and sovereign to the end, refused that fate. She locked herself in her mausoleum with her most trusted servant. Some say she took poison, others that she allowed an aspep, a sacred Egyptian cobra, to bite her. Whatever the method, her death was her final act of power. At 39 years old, Cleopatra left the world on her own terms. With her past not only a queen, but a civilization. Egypt would become a Roman province. The long line of pharaohs, stretching back millennia, ended with her. In the centuries that followed, Cleopatra became legend. Roman historians smeared her name, portraying her as manipulative, seductive, a threat to Roman virtue. Yet over time, other stories emerged. Scholars reevaluated her reign. Archaeologists uncovered inscriptions, coins, and temples that spoke of a capable and visionary ruler. Cleopatra governed during famine and war, rebuilt Egypt's economy, and protected her people's religious customs. She was not merely Caesar's mistress, or Antony's lover. She was Egypt's last and perhaps most remarkable monarch. She understood symbolism. She embraced the image of the goddess Isis, not out of vanity, but because it strengthened her position in the eyes of her subjects. She projected divinity and intellect in equal measure. Cleopatra ruled not through force alone, but through the power of perception, through wit, negotiation, and grace. Her court was a blend of Egyptian tradition and Hellenistic learning, a place of scrolls and rituals, debate and insight. Though her physical appearance has been endlessly debated, some coins suggest she had sharp features, others idealized her. Her allure lay in her mind. Contemporary accounts agree, she was magnetic in conversation, captivating in presence, and unafraid to challenge the men who ruled the world around her. She used every tool available to her. Diplomacy, romance, language, performance. She was a master of statecraft, in a time when the stakes were empires. Her son, Caesarion, briefly declared pharaoh after her death, was captured and killed by Octavian. Her other children, taken to Rome, vanished into history. But Cleopatra herself never vanished. Her name endured. In the plays of Shakespeare, she is both tragic and defiant. In art she is gilded and shadowed. In film, she walks in sandals through marble halls, mysterious and commanding. Yet the true Cleopatra, the woman who rode beside generals, who commanded fleets, who negotiated with emperors, is more remarkable still. The Nile still flows as it did in her time, passing the ruins of temples where her name was carved in stone. The stars she once studied still shine above the desert, and somewhere in the whispering wind of Egypt, her story is still told, not as a tale of a woman who fell, but of one who stood tall at the edge of two worlds. Cleopatra, Queen of the Nile, was more than a queen. She was an idea, a force, a memory of ancient power wrapped in silk and steel. Tonight, as sleep drapes over the world like a linen shroud, let the story of Cleopatra float gently through your thoughts. A queen born in marble halls, who ruled with gold and wisdom. A woman who loved fiercely, led bravely, and lived beyond the confines of time. In dreams, perhaps, you might glimpse her sailing her barge along the Nile, under a purple canopy, with the stars above, and history waiting quietly ahead. In the heart of ancient China, where mist clung gently to the tiled roofs of imperial palaces and the air held the scent of ink and sandalwood, a girl was born who would one day shake the foundations of an empire. Her name was Wu Zhao, but history would remember her as Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever sit upon the dragon throne as emperor in her own right. Her story, though sometimes twisted by legend and bias, is a tale of rare brilliance, political mastery, and quiet iron resolve. Through silk screens and echoing stone halls, through candlelit scrolls and whispered court intrigues, Wu's presence would define one of China's greatest eras, the Tang dynasty. She was born in 64 CE, during a time of cultural awakening and prosperity under the Tang. Her family was well-connected and educated, and Wu received a rare and rigorous education for a girl of her time. From an early age, she read poetry, studied Confucian texts, and learned music, history, and politics. Where others expected her to grow into a proper wife or concubine, Wu Zhao grew into something else, a strategist, a scholar, and eventually a sovereign. At just 14, she was brought to the imperial palace as a concubine of Emperor Taiz. In those years, young Wu observed the machinery of court life, the alliances, the betrayals, the rituals that masked raw ambition. When the emperor died, as custom dictated, Wu was sent to a Buddhist convent to retire from court life. But fate, and her own determination, would not leave her there. Taizong's son, now Emperor Gaozong, had noticed her even before his father's death. After becoming ruler, he brought her back from the convent, a bold, unprecedented move, and made her his consort. Rumors swirled around her return. Some whispered that she had seduced her way back into the palace. Others saw a woman of keen insight, finally finding a place to influence the state. Over time, she rose through the ranks, outmaneuvering rival consorts, and gaining the emperor's deep trust. When the Empress Wang fell out of favor, Wu Zhao was elevated in her place. It was a title few thought she could hold. But she did more than hold it, she expanded its power. As Gaozong's health began to fail, Wu began to make decisions in his name. Ministers and generals soon realized that real power was shifting. The Empress was not merely a figurehead, she was receiving reports, issuing decrees, organizing diplomacy. Under the soft rustle of brocade and behind layers of protocol, she was effectively ruling the empire. In 6083, after Gaozong's death, Wu did not step back. She became regent for her son, and when he failed to meet her expectations, she replaced him with another. Within a few years, Wu Zetian had done the unthinkable. She claimed the throne for herself, not as empress consort or dowager, but as emperor of China. A new dynasty, the Zhao, was declared. Court officials bowed before her, the Son of Heaven. Temples bore her name. Edicts were issued with her seal, and for the first time in its long history, China was ruled entirely by a woman. Her reign was marked not by chaos, but by extraordinary governance. Wu Zetian understood that her power would always be questioned, so she fortified it through brilliant administration. She appointed capable ministers, regardless of their background or family name. She reformed the civil service examinations, opening doors to commoners of merit, not just nobles of status. Scholars flourished under her patronage, producing poetry, histories, and legal texts. She placed education at the center of governance, believing that an informed bureaucracy would strengthen the empire more than a loyal aristocracy. Buddhism, too, rose under her guidance. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of Confucianism, Buddhism offered a more inclusive, compassionate worldview, one that justified female leadership through divine wisdom. Wu saw its value and supported monasteries, commissioned massive translations of sacred texts, and funded monumental Buddhist sculptures and temples. The Longmen grottos, still standing today, bear her inscriptions, a testament to her devotion and her desire to carve herself into the story of faith and nation alike. Her policies were often bold. She expanded granaries to feed the poor, issued tax reforms to balance burdens, and rebuilt networks of roads and canals. She appointed inspectors to oversee local governance and ensured punishments were meted out for corruption. But she was also, in moments, ruthless. Political rivals were exiled or executed. Secret police operated within the palace. Plots, real or imagined, were snuffed out with precision. These actions have earned her a reputation for cruelty in some histories, yet they also reflect the brutal necessities of maintaining power in a system not built for her. For every emperor before and after her, such acts were seen as firm rule. For Wu, they were often called tyranny, a double standard shaped by gender and fear. And yet fear was not all she inspired. Many admired her. She held daily audiences, read detailed reports, and personally reviewed petitions from farmers and widows. She took seriously the idea that the ruler was the parent of the people. It said that she rose before dawn each morning, a candle in hand, to begin the day's work. She surrounded herself with poets and monks, scientists and scholars. She read celestial reports from astrologers and military updates from distant borders. In her presence, ministers learned to choose their words carefully, not because she was harsh, but because she was listening. Her court was a place of contradiction, opulent, austere, progressive, and strict. Women served in positions of influence, rare in Chinese history. The Empress even allowed female officials to advise her, though always within the careful bounds of propriety. She walked a narrow path, balancing Confucian expectations with her own vision of enlightened rule. And while some despised her ascent, others saw it as divine justice, a correction of imbalance, a time of renewal under a wise and capable hand. Wu Zetian ruled for over 15 years as emperor, and decades more as a central force in Chinese politics. In her final years, illness and intrigue clouded her court, factions grew, and whispers returned. Eventually she was persuaded or forced to abdicate in favor of her son, and the Tang dynasty was restored. She died quietly in 705, buried beside her husband in the Chanling mausoleum, her tombstone left blank by her request. No epitaph carved, no final words imposed. Her life, she believed, would speak for itself. Over the centuries, her story has been rewritten many times, sometimes vilified, sometimes glorified. Confucian historians accused her of debauchery and manipulation. Buddhist monks revered her as a sage queen. Modern scholars have begun to see her more clearly, a woman of extraordinary vision, unflinching when faced with challenge, and unwilling to be silenced. Her achievements reshaped the government, expanded the rights of the scholarly class, and strengthened the imperial institution itself. Her reforms would echo through generations, long after her name had been pushed to the margins of official histories. In literature and legend, she became a paradox, the dragon lady, the wise mother, the seductress, the saint. But perhaps none of those titles are enough. She was an emperor, no more, and no less. In a world ruled by men, she carved out her space with intellect, discipline, and belief in her own right to rule. Her governance outshone many male rulers, and her court became a beacon of thought and order in a changing world. Even now, her memory stirs debates about power, gender, ambition, and legacy. Yet in the quiet of the Chanling tomb, where two emperors sleep beneath the earth, there is peace. The birds above sing in soft cycles, the wind moves gently through the pine. There are no drums of rebellion, no whispers of betrayal, only silence and the vast sky under which Wu Zetian once ruled. And as night stretches over the old capitals of Luoyang and Chang'an, perhaps one can still imagine her in the early hours, seated behind a low table, reading by lamplight, listening to reports of distant lands and border skirmishes, sipping tea as she prepares for the day. Calm, focused, aware. A woman who ruled not with sentiment but with clarity. Let her story drift into your dreams like falling petals, elegant, measured, and enduring. A queen who rose higher than any before her, and who wore the imperial robes not as borrowed cloth, but as her rightful skin. Wu Zetian, Empress of China, walked through history not as a guest, but as a sovereign. And as the world slowly turns beneath stars unchanged since her reign, her name lingers, quiet but unforgotten, on the lips of time. Chapter 3: Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of Two Thrones. In the soft glow of twilight, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills of southern France, Eleanor of Aquitaine rode across her lands, the gentle hooves of her horse carrying her swiftly over the earth that she had inherited. She was a woman of power and grace, a ruler in her own right, and her presence was as much a part of the Aquitaine landscape as the towering castles and verdant vineyards. Born in 1122, Eleanor would rise to become one of the most influential figures of the Middle Ages, a woman who held not just one crown, but two, a queen of both France and England, a ruler of the mighty Duchy of Aquitaine, and a patron of arts and learning. Her story is one of remarkable complexity, filled with triumph, tragedy, and a legacy that would echo for centuries. Eleanor's life began in a time when women were rarely seen as rulers in their own right. Her birth in the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine ensured that she would never be a mere pawn in the hands of others, yet her early years were marked by both privilege and hardship. The Aquitaine region, a place known for its lush landscapes, rich culture and independence, was as fierce in spirit as it was beautiful. As a child, Eleanor would have been surrounded by the knowledge and beauty that her lands were renowned for. The arts, music and poetry were woven into the fabric of daily life. These were the seeds of her future passions, and the court of Aquitaine, with its elegant festivals and intellectual pursuits, was the perfect place for a young princess to grow. At the age of 15, Eleanor's world was irrevocably changed by the sudden death of her father, Duke William d'Aix of Aquitaine. The inheritance of such a vast and prosperous territory was rare for a woman, but Eleanor was not only her father's heir, she was also highly sought after for her beauty and intelligence. Within weeks of her father's death, Eleanor was married to King Louis VII of France. The marriage was not one of love, but one of political strategy. Louis, who was deeply religious, was immediately struck by Eleanor's beauty and sharp mind. But despite their shared power, the marriage was not destined to be a happy one. The differences in their temperaments, Louis' quiet, pious nature and Eleanor's vibrant, free-spirited personality, soon became apparent. Though their union was politically advantageous, the personal and emotional divide between them would grow. The royal marriage had far-reaching consequences for Eleanor. As Queen of France, she was thrust into the complexities of royal politics, court life, and perhaps most notably, the Crusade. In 1107, Louis and Eleanor set out on the Second Crusade, a military campaign that sought to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. Eleanor, ever the determined and adventurous woman, joined her husband's forces, an unusual decision for a queen. She led a retinue of noble women, all of whom followed her lead in the dangerous and unpredictable journey. The crusade, however, was disastrous. The French army faced defeat after defeat, and Eleanor's marriage to Louis, already strained, began to unravel. The failure of the crusade only intensified the rift between them, and soon, Eleanor's dissatisfaction with her marriage reached a boiling point. She returned to France, only to seek an annulment from Louis, a request that was granted. The annulment was a bold move for Eleanor, one that defied the conventions of her time. At the age of 30, she was no longer a young princess, and the idea of a woman ruling in her own right was still a rarity in medieval Europe. Yet Eleanor was not a woman to be easily constrained. Within weeks of the annulment, she married again, this time to Henry Plantagenet, the future King Henry II of England. This second marriage would prove to be even more significant than the first, for it gave Eleanor not only the English throne, but also the vast territories of Normandy, Anjou, and Maine. With these lands, she became the queen of an empire that spanned much of Western Europe. Henry, a charismatic and ambitious man, had already set his sights on the throne of England before he married Eleanor. Together they formed a powerful partnership, a union that brought England and much of France under their control. Yet as with her marriage to Louis, Eleanor's life with Henry would not be without its challenges. Henry's personality was as ambitious and fiercely independent as her own, and their marriage, while politically advantageous, was fraught with power struggle. Eleanor, for her part, was deeply involved in the governance of her lands, and her influence was felt far beyond the borders of Aquitaine. As a patron of the arts, she supported poets, musicians, and scholars, fostering an environment of cultural flourish. It was under her patronage that the concept of courtly love, a chivalric code of romance and virtue, was elevated to new heights. The troubadours who sang of this idealistic love found in Eleanor not just a patron, but an inspiration. Her court became a center for intellectual and artistic pursuits, and her support of the arts left an indelible mark on medieval culture. Yet as with all powerful figures, Eleanor's influence came with challenge. She had 5 sons with Henry, and while she was a devoted mother, the relationship between her children and their father was often strained. As Henry's power grew, so too did his desire for control over his sons. Eleanor found herself caught in the middle of a complex web of family politics. Her sons, particularly Richard, who would later be known as Richard the Lionheart, grew restless under their father's authoritarian rule. Eleanor, ever the shrewd and ambitious figure, aligned herself with her sons in opposition to Henry, leading to a bitter conflict that would tear the family apart. The quarrels between Henry and his sons escalated, and in the end Eleanor was imprisoned by her husband for a period of 16 years, locked away in a tower in England. It was a heartbreaking betrayal, but Eleanor, ever resilient, despite her imprisonment, Eleanor's influence was far from diminished. After Henry's death in 1189, Eleanor was released from captivity, and her son Richard ascended to the throne of England. Known for his military prowess and bravery, Richard was to become one of the most legendary kings of England, earning the title of Richard the Lionheart. But Richard's reign was brief, for he spent much of his time away on the Third Crusade. During his absence, Eleanor ruled England with great competence and wisdom, keeping the kingdom steady during the turbulent years of Richard's absence. Eleanor's legacy, however, extended beyond her own reign. She was the mother of 2 kings, Richard the Lionheart and King John, the latter of whom would become one of the most infamous monarchs in English history. While Richard's reign was marked by heroic deeds and triumphs, John's was marred by failure and political strife. Eleanor, ever the matriarch, would live to see her son John's troubled reign, and although she could not prevent his disastrous mistakes, her role as a mother to these 2 extraordinary and troubled sons was one of the defining aspects of her life. Throughout her life, Eleanor was more than just a queen. She was a force of nature, a woman who shaped history through her decisions, her patronage of the arts, and her role in the Crusades. She was both a mother and a ruler, a queen who was not content to stand by passively as the world moved around her. Her legacy as a patron of courtly love and poetry, as well as her involvement in the politics of both France and England, makes her one of the most remarkable figures of the medieval world. Her life, full of both personal and political triumphs and tragedies, remains a testament to the power of determination, intelligence, and grace. Even in the quiet moments of her later years, as she retired to her lands in Aquitaine, Eleanor continued to embody the strength and spirit that had defined her life. As she aged, Eleanor remained sharp, involved in the affairs of her family and kingdom. She passed away in 1204 at the age of 82, having witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the glory of her children's reigns, and the flourishing of her beloved Aquitaine. She was buried beside her husband, Henry II, in Fontevraud Abbey, her final resting place a quiet reflection of the remarkable life she had led. Yet even in death, her legacy endured. Her name echoed through the halls of history, not as a passive consort, or an accessory to the thrones of her husbands and sons, but as a woman who carved her own path, who ruled with strength, wisdom, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of France and England, a patron of the arts, a mother of kings, and a warrior in her own right, will forever be remembered as one of the most powerful women to ever grace the annals of history. Her story is one of love, loss, power, and resilience, a timeless tale of a woman who shaped the course of history, and whose influence resonates through the age. Chapter 4: Queen Nzinga, the warrior queen of Angola. The sun was setting over the vast golden plains of Angola, the air thick with the earthy scent of the land, and the promise of battle. In the distance, the sound of drums echoed, calling warriors to assemble. It was a sound that would become synonymous with the name Nzinga, a queen whose strength, resilience, and wisdom would inspire legends across Africa and beyond. Born into the royal family of the Ndungo kingdom in the late 16th century, Nzinga's life was destined to be extraordinary, but it would take battles, both on the battlefield and in the halls of diplomacy, to solidify her place as one of the greatest leaders Africa had ever known. Nzinga's rise to power was marked by determination and an indomitable will. From a young age, she was no stranger to the intricacies of court life and leadership. She grew up in a world where tribal politics, European colonial ambitions, and the vast resources of Africa intersected in ways that shaped the future of the continent. The Portuguese, with their expanding empire, had been attempting to conquer the lands along the coast of West and Central Africa, bringing with them a devastating tide of violence, exploitation, and enslavement. The Kingdom of Nungo, which was located in what is now northern Angola, was a key target for Portuguese expansion. It was here that Nzinga's leadership would be forged, not through the comforts of court, but through the fires of conflict. At the time of Nzinga's rise to power, the Portuguese had already established forts and trading posts along the coast, but their colonial ambitions stretched far beyond commerce. They sought to control the interior, to extract slaves from the heart of Africa, and fortify their dominance in the region. The Kingdom of Nungo, under King Nongola, resisted these ambitions, but the threat of Portuguese forces grew ever more pressing. It was in this time of crisis that Nzinga's diplomatic acumen and military prowess would come to the forefront. Nzinga's initial appearance in the historical record is tied to a series of negotiations with the Portuguese, led by the governor of the Portuguese colony in Luanda. In 1622, King Nongola sent his sister Nzinga to meet with the Portuguese governor, a man named João Correia de Souza, in a diplomatic effort to form an alliance and to negotiate terms of peace. However, the meeting did not go smooth. The Portuguese, who were notorious for their condescending treatment of African leaders, demanded that Nzinga sit on the floor during the meeting. Unwilling to show weakness, Nzinga calmly ordered one of her servants to kneel, forming a chair with their body. She then sat upon her servant's back, sending a clear message to the Portuguese that she would not submit to their disrespect. This small act of defiance, though seemingly subtle, was emblematic of the fierce determination that would define Nzinga's reign. Though the negotiations with the Portuguese governor initially failed, Nzinga's resolve only grew stronger. She returned to her kingdom and continued her efforts to protect Ndongo from Portuguese encroachment. But her brother King Nongola was not as steadfast in his resistance. When he was eventually captured by the Portuguese in 1626, Nzinga's position as the leader of Nungo became undeniable. Upon her brother's death, Nzinga assumed the role of queen regent for her young nephew. However, her ambitions were much larger than merely serving as regent. Nzinga was determined to free her people from the grip of Portuguese colonial rule. Her military strategies were as brilliant as they were unconventional. Nzinga led her armies personally, donning the armor of a warrior and taking to the battlefield with her soldiers. Her understanding of the terrain, the strengths of her people, and the tactics of her enemies made her a formidable opponent. Unlike the Portuguese, who relied on their firearms and colonial experience, Nzinga's forces were adept in guerrilla warfare. She and her soldiers struck swiftly and decisively, using the dense forests and rugged landscape to their advantage, launching ambushes and raids that took the Portuguese by surprise. Nzinga's intimate knowledge of the land, combined with her ability to inspire her troops, made her a force to be reckoned with. But it was not only her military acumen that set Nzinga apart. Her diplomatic skills were equally impressive. Recognizing that she could not defeat the Portuguese in open battle alone, she sought to form alliances with other African kingdoms, and even the Dutch, who were also seeking to undermine Portuguese dominance in the region. Nzinga's diplomatic efforts were both shrewd and strategic. She navigated the delicate balance of power, knowing when to fight and when to negotiate, and she was not afraid to use any means necessary to achieve her goals. In one particularly remarkable moment, Nzinga allied herself with the Dutch, a move that led to a series of successful campaigns against the Portuguese. She knew that the Portuguese were vulnerable when faced with a coordinated opposition, and she seized the opportunity to strike when they were least expecting it. However, despite her successes in battle and diplomacy, Nzinga's struggle against the Portuguese was not without its setback. The Portuguese, though often outmatched on the battlefield, had the advantage of superior naval power, which allowed them to resupply their forces and exert influence over neighboring territory. Despite her best efforts, Nzinga was eventually forced to retreat to the interior of Angola, where she would continue her resistance against the Portuguese from a position of relative strength. Her kingdom was never fully conquered, but the Portuguese were able to establish control over parts of the region, forcing Nzinga into a prolonged war of attrition. Even as she fought for her people's freedom, Nzinga's personal life was marked by hardship and sacrifice. In 1647, after years of war, Nzinga was forced to make a peace treaty with the Portuguese,
but it was a peace that came on her own terms. She agreed to cede some of her territory in exchange for the freedom of her people and the right to govern her lands without Portuguese interference. However, the peace was fragile, and Nzinga's struggle for her kingdom was far from over. She continued to resist Portuguese domination in every way she could, never truly accepting the subjugation of her people. Nzinga's reign continued until her death in 1663, but her legacy as one of Africa's greatest warrior queens would live on long after her passing. Her leadership, her unwavering determination, and her mastery of both the battlefield and the negotiating table would inspire generations of African leaders to come. Nzinga was not only a warrior queen, she was a symbol of resistance and resilience, a woman who stood tall in the face of imperial oppression and who fought for the freedom and dignity of her people. In the years following her death, Nzinga's memory would become enshrined in the hearts and minds of her people. Her story would be passed down through the generations, not as a tale of defeat, but as a saga of strength and perseverance. In Angola, she became a symbol of national pride, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the spirit of resistance could never be extinguished. Her legacy continues to inspire not only the people of Angola, but also those around the world who fight for justice, freedom, and self-determination. Even now, centuries after her reign, the name Nzinga echoes through the halls of history. She remains a powerful figure in African folklore, her courage and leadership continuing to resonate in the collective memory of her people. The warrior queen who once stood against the might of the Portuguese Empire has become an icon of empowerment, a beacon for those who refuse to bow to oppression. In the quiet whispers of the Angolan wind, one can still hear the faint drumbeats of Nzinga's battle cry, reverberating across the land she fought so hard to protect. As her story is told and retold, Nzinga's spirit remains ever present, a reminder of the strength of women in leadership, the power of resilience in the face of adversity, and the enduring legacy of a queen who fought not only for herself, but for the freedom of her people. The warrior queen of Angola lives on, her legacy immortalized in the hearts of those who continue to fight for justice and equality, her name forever etched in the chronicles of history.
Chapter 5. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. The year was 1588, and the sea was alive with tension. The English Channel, a vast expanse of water separating England from the rest of Europe, was about to witness a historic battle, one that would forever change the course of history. The Spanish Armada, a formidable fleet sent by King Philip II of Spain, was sailing toward England, its mission clear: to crush the Protestant kingdom of Elizabeth I, a queen who had earned both the admiration and the ire of Europe. Elizabeth, who had ruled England for nearly 3 decades, was no stranger to the challenges of power. As the Protestant Reformation had spread across Europe, so too had the threat of Catholic opposition, and Elizabeth had navigated the stormy seas of politics with remarkable skill. She had already faced numerous plots against her life, schemes by her Catholic enemies, who saw her as an illegitimate ruler and a usurper of the throne. But this was different. This was the moment when the future of her kingdom, her legacy, and her very life would be decided. The Armada, with its hundreds of ships and thousands of men, was supposed to be an unstoppable force, the culmination of Spain's power and dominance over the seas. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Elizabeth I, a woman who had long been underestimated by her enemies, was about to show the world what she was made of. Standing at the edge of her realm, looking out over the sea, Elizabeth understood that her reign was at a crossroad. She was the last of the Tudor dynasty, the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, and she had ruled England during a time of great turbulence. Her reign had been defined by religious strife, political intrigue, and a series of wars that had threatened to tear England apart. But through it all, Elizabeth had emerged as a formidable leader, one who had restored England to its former glory after the chaos of her sister Mary I's reign. And now she would face her greatest challenge. With a calm but determined voice, Elizabeth addressed her troops on the eve of the battle, dressed in her regal armor, a symbol of her courage and resolve. The Virgin Queen, as she had become known, had never married, and her refusal to take a husband had been the subject of much speculation throughout her reign. But in this moment, Elizabeth's identity as queen and leader was undivided. She was England's protector, and her people looked to her for guidance and strength. As the battle unfolded, it would become clear that Elizabeth's leadership, both on the battlefield and in the halls of her court, had been the key to England's survival. The English navy, though smaller than the Spanish fleet, fought with fierce determination, using the winds to their advantage. The Spanish, unprepared for the English tactics, found themselves caught in a storm of fire and confusion. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a monumental victory for Elizabeth and for England, a moment that would be remembered for centuries to come. It was not just a military triumph, it was a symbolic victory for Protestantism, a triumph of English independence over foreign control, and a testament to the strength of a queen who had never wavered in the face of adversity. But Elizabeth's reign was about far more than military victories and religious struggles. Her legacy was shaped by her understanding of the power of the arts, the importance of exploration, and the impact of culture on the identity of a nation. During her reign, England experienced what would come to be known as the Elizabethan Renaissance, a period of cultural flourishing that produced some of the greatest works in English literature and drama. The works of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and other playwrights became the foundation of England's artistic legacy, and Elizabeth, a patron of the arts, supported this flourishing of culture. She understood that the arts were not just a form of entertainment, they were a reflection of the soul of a nation. Under her patronage, the Globe Theatre rose to prominence, and England became the center of a cultural revolution that would influence generations to come. Elizabeth, though a monarch with immense political power, was also a woman who appreciated beauty, creativity, and the power of the written word. Elizabeth's reign was also a time of great exploration. The world beyond England's shores was still largely unknown, but Elizabeth's navy, emboldened by the defeat of the Spanish Armada, began to venture further into the world. The English began to establish colonies in the New World, and figures like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh set sail to claim new lands for England. Elizabeth, ever the astute ruler, recognized the importance of these explorations, not just for the expansion of England's territory, but for its place in the world. The discoveries made during this time would lay the foundation for the British Empire, one of the largest empires the world would ever see. But Elizabeth's foreign policy was not limited to exploration. She also understood the importance of diplomacy. Her court was a place of intense political maneuvering, and Elizabeth skillfully navigated the complex relationships between England and its neighbors. Her ability to balance the interests of her court and maintain England's independence in a world of shifting alliances was a testament to her political genius. Yet despite her power, Elizabeth's life was not without its personal struggle. Her decision never to marry has been the subject of much debate. Many historians have speculated about the reasons behind her choice to remain single, some suggesting that she feared losing control of her power, while others believe that she was deeply affected by the tragic execution of her mother Anne Boleyn. Whatever the reason, Elizabeth's decision to remain unmarried set her apart from many of her contemporaries, and her single status became a defining feature of her reign. She was known as the Virgin Queen, a title that underscored both her personal sacrifice and her political strategy. By not marrying, Elizabeth kept the throne firmly in her own hands, avoiding the complications that often arose from royal marriages. But her solitude also carried a deep emotional cost. Elizabeth, despite her powerful position, was still a woman, and like any woman, she longed for companionship and love. She had suitors, of course, many of them noblemen and princes from across Europe, but none of them could capture her heart. The most famous of these suitors was Robert Dudley, a childhood friend with whom Elizabeth shared a close and complex relationship. The two were rumored to have had a romantic attachment, but Elizabeth never married him, and Dudley's eventual marriage to another woman only deepened the Queen's isolation. Despite these personal struggles, Elizabeth's reign is remembered as one of the most successful and transformative periods in English history. She was a queen who ruled alone, without a king at her side, yet her reign was one of strength, stability, and triumph. She fostered an environment of exploration, innovation, and cultural growth, and her leadership would lay the foundation for the rise of England as a global power. Her ability to balance the demands of politics, religion, and culture, while maintaining her own identity as a ruler, is a testament to her extraordinary skill and vision. In her later years, Elizabeth faced increasing challenges as the pressures of age and illness took their toll. Her health began to decline, and her once vibrant appearance began to fade. Yet even in the face of these challenges, Elizabeth remained steadfast in her duties as queen. Her death in 1603 marked the end of the Tudor dynasty, and with it the close of one of the most remarkable reigns in history. Elizabeth was succeeded by James the Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. But Elizabeth's legacy lived on. Her reign is often seen as a golden age in English history, a time when England stood strong against its enemies, fostered cultural growth, and laid the groundwork for its eventual rise as an imperial power. The defeat of the Spanish Armada, her support of the arts, and her ability to rule alone without a husband made her a symbol of independence and strength. She was the Virgin Queen, a monarch who stood apart from the world, but whose influence would shape the course of history for centuries to come. Her reign, full of both triumph and sorrow, is a testament to the strength of a woman who ruled a nation in an era when women were often seen as subordinate to men. Elizabeth I, with her sharp intellect, indomitable will, and unyielding dedication to her people, remains one of the greatest monarchs in history. Her legacy continues to inspire not only those who study the history of England, but also those who understand the power of leadership, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of greatness. The Virgin Queen, as she is remembered, was more than just a monarch. She was a beacon of hope and strength in a world that often underestimated the power of women. Chapter 6. Catherine the Great, Empress of Enlightenment. The early years of Catherine the Great's life were far removed from the grandeur of the Russian Empire she would one day come to rule. Born in 1729, in Stettin, Prussia, now Szczecin, Poland, as Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, her beginnings were humble compared to the throne she would one day ascend. Her family, though of noble descent, was far from the imperial power that Catherine would come to wield. The young Sophie was far from the famed empress she would become, but her keen intelligence and ambition were apparent early on. She was raised in a strict, disciplinarian environment, taught the arts of diplomacy, languages, and court etiquette. Though she had no idea that she would one day sit upon the throne of Russia, Sophie's natural charisma and sharp mind set the stage for the dramatic events that would unfold in her life. Catherine's journey to power was not one paved with ease, nor was it one that came without sacrifice and struggle. In 1744, at the age of 15, Sophie was selected to marry the heir to the Russian throne, Grand Duke Peter of Russia, a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. When she arrived in Russia, she embraced her new name, Catherine, and began learning the language and customs of her new home, striving to adapt to her new role. But Catherine's marriage to Peter was hardly a fairy tale. Peter, an eccentric and often cruel man, was no match for Catherine's intelligence and resolve. He was disinterested in ruling, and their relationship soon soured. The Russian court too was divided. Peter's incompetence as a ruler was increasingly obvious, and many saw in Catherine the potential for a stronger, more capable monarch. As Peter's reign grew more unstable, Catherine's own ambitions began to take shape. She had spent years learning the intricacies of Russian politics, understanding its social and cultural dynamics, and aligning herself with the powerful factions at court. Catherine had mastered the art of diplomacy and built relationships with key figures in the Russian military and nobility, giving her the power she needed to challenge her husband's rule. She knew the moment would come when she could seize the throne. In 1762, that moment arrived. With the support of her allies, Catherine orchestrated a coup that led to her husband's deposition and subsequent murder, leaving her to assume the throne as Empress of Russia. It was a moment of immense political and personal triumph, but one that came at a great cost. Catherine knew that her reign would be under constant scrutiny, as she had taken the throne by force, but her resolve was unwavering. Once in power, Catherine set about transforming Russia. She was a ruler, not only of immense power but of great vision. Her reign would be defined by both the expansion of the Russian Empire and the modernization of its political and social systems. Her ambition was not merely to preserve the empire, she sought to reshape it, to bring it in line with the enlightened ideas that were sweeping across Europe. In this sense, Catherine's reign was not just one of conquest, it was one of progress and reform. She focused first on expanding the empire. Under her rule, Russia expanded its borders significantly, adding vast swaths of land in the Black Sea region, including parts of modern-day Ukraine and Crimea. Catherine's military campaigns were marked by both strategic brilliance and sheer determination. She understood the importance of military strength,
But she also knew that diplomacy was key to maintaining Russia's power in Europe. Her alliances with Austria and Prussia helped solidify Russia's position as a major European power. But Catherine was not content with merely increasing her empire's territory. She also sought to modernize its administration. She believed that a strong government was essential to ensuring the long-term stability of the empire, and she sought to improve the systems of governance throughout Russia. One of Catherine's most lasting legacies was her reforms in education. She understood that a strong empire required an educated populace, and so she set about expanding access to education for both boys and girls. In the late 18th century, this was a radical idea. Catherine established new schools and universities, bringing the ideas of the Enlightenment to Russia. She was deeply influenced by the Enlightenment thinkers of the time, including Voltaire and Diderot, and she sought to instill their ideas of reason, rationality, and education within her empire. In addition to promoting education, Catherine was a passionate patron of the arts and sciences. She understood that the development of culture and intellectual life was essential to the flourishing of her empire. She supported the work of artists, writers, and philosophers, and she personally corresponded with many of Europe's leading intellectuals. Her court became a hub of cultural and intellectual activity, and she herself was a deeply literate and intellectually curious woman. Catherine's efforts to modernize Russia extended beyond education and culture. She was also deeply committed to reforming the legal system. In 1767, she convened a legislative commission to reform the Russian legal code, a move that was unprecedented in the history of the Russian Empire. Though her reforms were often met with resistance from the Russian nobility, Catherine pressed forward, understanding that Russia needed to adapt if it was to thrive in the modern world. She introduced new laws that sought to balance the power of the nobility with the needs of the state, and she worked to strengthen the monarchy by centralizing power in her own hands. But despite her efforts at reform, Catherine's reign was not without its challenge. Russia remained a deeply stratified society, with vast disparities between the nobility and the peasantry. Though Catherine championed the cause of the common people in her early years as empress, she ultimately aligned herself with the nobility, granting them vast estates and power. This decision would come to haunt her later in her reign, as serfdom in Russia became more entrenched, and the divide between the rich and the poor deepened. Despite the many challenges she faced, Catherine's reign is remembered as one of the most successful in Russian history. She transformed Russia from a relatively backward nation into one of the great powers of Europe. She expanded the empire, modernized its administration, and promoted education, the arts and science in ways that were unheard of in Russia at the time. She became one of the most enlightened rulers of her era, and her legacy continues to be studied and admired by historians today. Catherine's relationship with the Enlightenment philosophers is also one of the most fascinating aspects of her reign. She corresponded with many of the leading intellectuals of the time, including Voltaire, Diderot, and Montesquieu, engaging in lively debates about politics, philosophy, and governance. She was particularly drawn to the ideas of Voltaire, who praised her as a progressive monarch and a patron of the Enlightenment. In her letters to Voltaire, Catherine demonstrated a deep understanding of the philosophical issues of the day, and she often expressed her admiration for the ideals of reason and liberty that were sweeping across Europe. She was not merely a passive recipient of Enlightenment ideas. She actively engaged with them, incorporating them into her policies and shaping the direction of her reign. Yet despite her progressive ideas, Catherine was not without her contradictions. She ruled with an iron hand, and her policies often favored the nobility over the common people. She continued the institution of serfdom, which tied millions of peasants to the land, and gave the nobility the power to control their lives. This decision has been the subject of much criticism, as it was at odds with the Enlightenment ideals that she espoused. Nevertheless, Catherine's reign remains a remarkable period in Russian history, and her legacy as one of the great monarchs of Europe is secure. Catherine's later years were marked by the challenges of aging and the complexities of succession. In 1796, she died suddenly of a stroke, leaving behind a legacy that would shape Russia for generations to come. Her son Paul I succeeded her, though he would rule in a much different manner, and his reign would be marked by instability and violence. Despite the turmoil that followed Catherine's death, her reign remains one of the most remarkable in Russian history. She brought Russia into the modern era, expanding its borders, modernizing its administration, and promoting the arts, education, and science. Her influence on Russian culture and governance is still felt today, and she remains one of the most respected and admired figures in Russian history. Chapter 7. Queen Seondeok, Korea's Scholar Queen. Seondeok, one of Korea's most remarkable figures, holds a special place in the hearts of her people and in the annals of history. As the first female ruler of Korea, her story stands as an extraordinary testament to the capabilities of women in leadership, during a time when political power was firmly in the hands of men. Born in 602 AD, she was a member of the royal Silla family, part of the Three Kingdoms period of Korea. Seondeok's path to the throne was not straightforward, nor was it inevitable, given the gender norms of her time. Yet through a combination of intelligence, wisdom, and strength, she carved out a legacy that would endure long after her death. When Seondeok ascended the throne in 6032, it was under dire circumstances. The Silla Kingdom, situated in the southeastern part of the Korean peninsula, was experiencing internal turmoil and external threats. In a world where women rarely ruled, the idea of a woman as a sovereign was met with skepticism by some, while others saw it as an opportunity for change. Seondeok was the daughter of King Jinpyong, who was deeply respected, and her mother, Queen Maya, was also known for her intelligence and political influence. From a young age, Seondeok was groomed for leadership, and her education focused not only on the arts and culture of the time, but also on governance, military strategy, and diplomacy. She was a child prodigy, adept at languages and literature, and it became clear early on that she was destined for something far greater than a conventional role. Despite her intelligence, Seondeok faced the patriarchal systems that dominated Korean society. The Silla Kingdom, like its neighbors, had its own deeply ingrained hierarchies, with men typically holding power. It wasn't just a personal challenge, but a cultural and political one as well. Seondeok's political wisdom and emotional intelligence allowed her to rise above these challenges. When her father passed away, the Silla court was divided on who should succeed him. Seondeok's ascension was not a given, and her rise to power came as the result of careful maneuvering within the court, where she had cultivated alliances over the years. However, it was not just her political savvy that helped her claim the throne, but her intellect and foresight. Seondeok was able to command the respect of the people, not through force, but by establishing herself as a ruler who was deeply connected to the needs and well-being of her kingdom. One of the central aspects of Seondeok's reign was her promotion of intellectual pursuits, especially in astronomy and science. She was a visionary ruler who understood the importance of knowledge in governing a kingdom. At a time when many rulers focused solely on military conquest, Seondeok believed in the power of science to strengthen Silla. In 6034, she oversaw the construction of one of the most remarkable achievements of her reign, Cheomseongdae, the ancient astronomical observatory. This structure still stands today, and it is recognized as one of the oldest observatories in East Asia. Made from 362 stone blocks, the observatory was designed to observe the stars and predict celestial events. It is believed that Seondeok had a profound interest in the stars, understanding the connection between celestial movements and the earthly life of her kingdom. The observatory helped her people predict the seasons, vital for agriculture, and it was a symbol of her commitment to progress and innovation. Seondeok's patronage of astronomy went hand in hand with her deep support for the spread of Buddhism in Silla. Buddhism was taking root in the kingdom during her reign, and Seondeok, with her broad understanding of religion and its role in governance, embraced it fully. She saw Buddhism not only as a spiritual guide, but as a means to unify the people and establish a sense of peace and order. To solidify her connection with the Buddhist community, Seondeok ordered the construction of many Buddhist temples, most notably the famous Dubotap and Sugatap pagodas, which are part of the Bulguksa temple. These temples were not just places of worship, they symbolized her commitment to cultural progress and the integration of spiritual life with the political system. Queen Seondeok's reign was marked by a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of different elements of governance. Her promotion of Buddhism helped stabilize her kingdom internally, as it provided moral and spiritual guidance during a period of transition and upheaval. It also served as a unifying force, helping the people of Silla rally around shared values. But beyond religious support, Seondeok also made significant efforts to preserve and promote Silla's rich cultural heritage, which she understood as essential to the strength of the kingdom. The queen's respect for learning and culture was integral to her reign. Not only did she personally support intellectual pursuits, but she also ensured that scholars and philosophers were valued and recognized. Her royal court was filled with scholars and poets, and her encouragement of the arts and literature helped to develop a flourishing intellectual environment. Seondeok was not just a scholar though, she was a political leader who knew the importance of strategic thinking. Silla, though powerful, faced external threats from the neighboring kingdoms of Baekje and Gogari. She had to lead her people through various conflicts, and in many cases, she showed remarkable diplomatic and military prowess. One notable episode during her reign was her strategic alliance with the Tang dynasty of China. This alliance helped Silla consolidate power and provide a buffer against the other two kingdoms. At the same time, Seondeok's handling of internal political struggles within her court demonstrated her ability to manage power dynamics, sometimes by making difficult decisions that would alienate certain factions while securing her own position. In her leadership, Seondeok was revered for her wisdom, decisiveness, and ability to see the bigger picture. She was not just a queen, she was a true ruler, capable of inspiring loyalty and respect. Her approach to leadership was not one of personal grandeur or indulgence. Instead, she was focused on the long-term well-being of her kingdom and its people. Even her enemies recognized her political genius. Her reputation as a wise and capable ruler was so strong that she earned the title Seondeok, meaning the wise and virtuous queen. Her ability to manage both the spiritual and political realms was one of her greatest strengths, and she remains one of Korea's most respected rulers. Despite facing challenges that could have overwhelmed others, Seondeok ruled for a remarkable 15 years, and her reign is often remembered as one of the golden ages of Silla. Under her leadership, the kingdom experienced a period of stability and cultural flourishing. The temples, pagodas, and observatories she built remain as testaments to her vision, and the intellectual and artistic advancements made during her reign laid the foundation for future generations of scholars and artists. Queen Seondeok's reign ended with her death. While her legacy lived on, her passing marked the end of a significant era in Silla history. Though she was succeeded by her cousin Queen Zenobia, who continued her work, Seondeok's influence remained profound. Her reign set a standard for future leaders, showing that a ruler could be both intellectually and politically powerful. Her combination of wisdom, diplomacy, and strategic thinking set her apart as one of the most capable and beloved monarchs in Korean history. Today, Queen Seondeok is remembered not just for her achievements in astronomy, Buddhism, and governance, but for the cultural legacy she left behind. In modern Korea, her reign is celebrated as a time when wisdom, knowledge, and compassion were balanced with strong leadership. Her story continues to inspire generations of women and leaders, serving as a reminder of the strength of intellect and the power of a woman who dared to lead in a world where few others like her existed.
Chapter 8. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh of Egypt. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh of Egypt, is one of the most fascinating figures in ancient history. Her story is one of ambition, strength, and defiance against the norms of a society that was staunchly patriarchal. Born around 1507 BCE, she was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and Queen Ahmose, and her rise to power was anything but ordinary. In a world where leadership was traditionally male, Hatshepsut not only assumed the role of a ruler, but did so with such authority and skill that her reign remains one of the most prosperous in Egypt's history. Hatshepsut was initially married to her half-brother, Thutmose II, and together they had a daughter, Neferuer. When Thutmose II died unexpectedly, Hatshepsut found herself in a delicate position. Her stepson Thutmose III was still a child at the time, and as was customary, Hatshepsut was meant to act as regent until he came of age. However, she quickly demonstrated that she was not content with merely being a regent. Instead, Hatshepsut took matters into her own hands and declared herself pharaoh, ruling in her own right. This decision was unprecedented, as it was unheard of for a woman to hold such power in ancient Egypt. But Hatshepsut was determined to prove herself as capable as any man, and she understood that to maintain her authority, she needed to present herself, not as a woman but as a king. To assert her authority, Hatshepsut began to portray herself as a male pharaoh. She took on the full regalia of a king, including the traditional false beard and kilt, and depicted herself in statues and reliefs as a man. This wasn't just for symbolism's sake, it was a strategic move. By presenting herself as male, Hatshepsut could command the respect of the people and avoid the skepticism that would have accompanied a female ruler. It was a brilliant move that allowed her to navigate the constraints of her time while securing her position at the top of Egypt's hierarchy. Her portrayal as a male ruler became so widespread that it was hard for future generations to imagine her as anything but the king she claimed to be. This was particularly important for her reign, as it helped her to gain acceptance from the powerful priests, military leaders, and other elite members of Egyptian society, many of whom would have been resistant to a female leader. Despite the challenges she faced in taking on the role of a male pharaoh, Hatshepsut ruled with remarkable skill and vision. During her reign, which lasted for over 20 years, Egypt experienced a period of stability and prosperity. One of the most notable aspects of her rule was her ability to maintain peace, both within her borders and with neighboring nations. Unlike many of her predecessors, Hatshepsut did not seek to expand Egypt's borders through military conquest. Instead, she focused on building trade relationships and strengthening Egypt's economy. Under her leadership, Egypt thrived as a center of commerce, and her reign was marked by economic stability that allowed the kingdom to flourish. One of the major accomplishments of Hatshepsut's reign was her emphasis on trade, particularly with the land of Punt, which was located along the Red Sea. This region was rich in exotic goods, including incense, myrrh, gold, and rare animals, all of which were highly prized in Egypt. Hatshepsut's trade expedition to Punt, led by her trusted official, Seondeok, is one of the most famous events of her reign. The expedition returned with an array of valuable goods, which were then displayed in the grandest of fashion. This trade mission not only brought wealth to Egypt, but also symbolized Hatshepsut's diplomatic prowess. It was an indication that under her rule, Egypt was able to establish its influence through peaceful means, rather than relying solely on military might. Hatshepsut's reign was also characterized by an extensive building program that reshaped Egypt's architecture. The most enduring symbol of her rule is the magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahar, located on the west bank of the Nile near Luxor. This temple is an architectural marvel, carved into the cliffs of the Theban mountains. It was a bold and innovative design, different from anything that had come before it. The temple was dedicated to the sun god Amun, as well as to Hatshepsut herself, and it was designed to reflect her divine status as pharaoh. The grandeur of the temple, with its terraced structure and colonnades, still stands as a testament to Hatshepsut's vision and her understanding of the power of architecture to solidify her legacy. The Temple of Deir el-Bahari was not only a symbol of Hatshepsut's reign, but also a political statement. It was a place where Hatshepsut could show her power and reaffirm her legitimacy as pharaoh. Inside the temple there are detailed reliefs that depict her divine birth and her coronation, which were meant to emphasize her right to rule. One of the most famous scenes in the temple is the depiction of the expedition to Punt, where Hatshepsut's fleet is shown bringing back treasures from the land of Punt. These scenes are not just records of trade, they were designed to portray Hatshepsut as a capable and powerful ruler, who was not only concerned with the well-being of her people, but also with expanding Egypt's influence. In addition to her impressive building projects, Hatshepsut also worked to improve Egypt's internal infrastructure. She initiated the construction of temples, obelisks, and other monuments throughout Egypt, all of which served to enhance the glory of her reign. These projects were not just a means of demonstrating her power, but also a way of providing jobs and stimulating Egypt's economy. Through her building initiatives, Hatshepsut was able to create a lasting legacy of prosperity and achievement that would endure for centuries. While Hatshepsut's reign was largely peaceful and prosperous, it was not without controversy. After her death in 1458 BCE, her stepson Thutmose III ascended the throne, and his reign was marked by a period of military expansion. Thutmose III, who had initially been a young child when Hatshepsut became pharaoh, likely harbored resentment toward his stepmother for claiming the throne that he believed was rightfully his. In the years following her death, many of her monuments were defaced or destroyed, and her name was erased from many of the official records. This deliberate erasure may have been an attempt to undermine her legacy and remove the memory of a female pharaoh from Egypt's history. Despite these attempts to erase her memory, Hatshepsut's legacy has endured. Archaeologists and historians have uncovered much of her story, and her reign is now seen as one of the most successful and significant periods in ancient Egyptian history. Hatshepsut's ability to maintain peace, promote trade, and oversee grand building projects speaks to her talents as a ruler. Her decision to present herself as a male king may have been controversial at the time, but it allowed her to achieve the same level of respect and power that any male pharaoh would have enjoyed. In many ways, Hatshepsut was ahead of her time. She ruled Egypt with grace, intelligence, and strength, and her legacy continues to inspire people around the world today. As one of Egypt's longest reigning queens, Hatshepsut stands as a symbol of female empowerment in an era when women rarely held such positions of power. She managed to defy the norms of her time, both in terms of gender and leadership, and her reign brought Egypt peace, prosperity, and cultural advancement. Her contributions to architecture, trade, and Egypt's internal stability have cemented her place as one of the greatest pharaohs in history. Today, her story is a reminder of what can be accomplished when one dares to challenge the expectations placed upon them, and how one person's vision can shape the course of an entire civilization. Chapter 9: Queen Victoria, the Imperial Matriarch. Queen Victoria, the Imperial Matriarch, ruled Britain and its vast empire for over 6 decades, a period that saw the transformation of not only Britain but much of the world. Ascending to the throne in 1837, at just 18 years old, she would go on to become the longest reigning monarch of her time, a title she would hold for over a century, until Queen Elizabeth II surpassed her record in Victoria's reign, known as the Victorian era, would shape the course of history, influencing everything from social customs and cultural norms to industrial growth and imperial expansion. Her name became synonymous with an age of both opulence and repression, where strict social codes coexisted with tremendous progress. However, beneath the facade of regal composure lay a woman who was deeply affected by personal loss and the pressures of an empire at its zenith. Queen Victoria's journey to the throne was an unexpected one. Born in 1819 to Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, she was not initially in line for the throne. However, with the untimely deaths of her uncles, including the reigning King George IV and his successor, William I, the young Victoria found herself next in line. She became queen at the tender age of 18, just as Britain was beginning to experience sweeping changes in politics, industry, and society. Initially, Victoria was somewhat unsure of her role and responsibilities, but it did not take long for her to assume full command of the throne. Unlike many monarchs of her time, she was determined to make her own decisions and wield her authority decisively. Victoria's reign was marked by dramatic changes, particularly in the realms of industry and empire. Under her leadership, the British Empire expanded to become the largest empire the world had ever seen. Stretching across continents, from India and Africa to Australia and the Caribbean, the empire was a symbol of British power and influence. Victoria's imperialist ambitions were largely carried out through her ministers and advisors, but she played an active role in promoting the expansion of Britain's overseas territories. The British Empire during her reign was a formidable force in global affairs, and much of the world's wealth and resources flowed through its ports and colonies. But while Victoria presided over an empire that spanned the globe, her vision was not simply about conquest and expansion. She also saw herself as a symbol of stability and moral guidance, something that would resonate throughout her reign. Perhaps the most significant aspect of Queen Victoria's rule was the personal tragedy that struck her life, which would cast a shadow over much of her reign. In 1840, Victoria married her cousin Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a German prince whom she had fallen deeply in love with. Their marriage was one of deep affection and mutual respect. Prince Albert became Victoria's most trusted advisor, and the two shared a deep bond both personally and politically. Albert was not just a consort, he was her partner in every sense, helping to shape the political landscape of Britain and advising her on matters of governance. His presence brought stability to the monarchy, and his influence was felt across the empire. Under his guidance, Victoria adopted a more modern approach to the monarchy, embracing new ideas and methods of governing. But in 1861, Victoria's world was shattered when Prince Albert died suddenly of a long illness, leaving her utterly bereft. The loss of Albert was devastating for Victoria, and it marked a turning point in her life. She withdrew from public view and wore black for the rest of her life, entering a period of intense mourning. For much of the remaining years of her reign, she was described as a reclusive queen, unable to regain her former exuberance. Victoria's grief was not just a personal tragedy but a public one, as the British people witnessed their queen, once a symbol of strength and vigor, retreat into a shadow of her former self. This period of mourning was a profound challenge to Victoria, and her response to it was a reflection of the deep emotional bond she had shared with Albert. Despite her sorrow, Queen Victoria continued to rule, and her reign moved forward. She had inherited an empire in the midst of industrial transformation, and during her reign, Britain experienced some of the most significant changes in its history. The Industrial Revolution, which had begun in the late 18th century, accelerated in the 19th century, leading to technological advancements that would alter the course of history. The steam engine, the railway, and advances in manufacturing all came to define the Victorian age. These developments revolutionized the economy, creating new industries, opportunities, and social dynamics. The Industrial Revolution was not without its hardships, however, and the rapid growth of cities created squalid living conditions for men. Child labor and long working hours were commonplace in factories, and social reforms became a critical issue during Victoria's reign. Still, Queen Victoria remained a figurehead of stability. Even as her nation underwent massive change, she would come to symbolize the conflicting aspects of the era: progress and tradition, the grandeur of empire and the social problems that accompanied it. In addition to her empire and industrial achievements, Queen Victoria's reign was also a time of significant cultural transformation. The arts and literature flourished during the Victorian era, with writers such as Charles Dickens, the Bronte sisters, and Thomas Hardy capturing the complexities of life during this time. The period saw the rise of the novel as a dominant literary form, and the exploration of social issues, including poverty, class disparity, and the struggles of women became prominent theme. The Victorian obsession with morality and respectability was often juxtaposed with a growing awareness of the darker side of society. Victorian architecture and design also reached new heights, with the ornate and lavish styles of the period influencing everything from furniture to public buildings. The influence of the Victorian era can still be seen today in the architecture of London and in the literature that continues to be studied and adored worldwide. Queen Victoria's personal life continued to have an impact on her reign, and her children would go on to play significant roles in European history. Victoria and Albert had 9 children, and their marriages into other European royal families earned them the nickname the Grandmother of Europe. The alliances forged through these marriages played a crucial role in shaping European diplomacy during the 19th and early 20th. Victoria's children, particularly her eldest son, Albert Edward, who would later become King Edward VII, would eventually take on key positions within the British monarchy. Despite the grief she experienced, Victoria's family remained a central part of her life, and her role as a mother and matriarch shaped her legacy as much as her role as queen. Queen Victoria's death in 1901 marked the end of the Victorian era, a period that had profoundly shaped both Britain and the wider world. Her passing was mourned by millions, as her reign had spanned a period of tremendous change and achievement. Victoria's legacy as the imperial matriarch of the British Empire is undeniable, and her impact on history is immeasurable. The British Empire, though it would slowly decline in the 20th century, was at its height under her rule. She had presided over a vast colonial empire that influenced global trade, culture, and politics. Her reign also saw the establishment of modern institutions and the rise of the industrial world. Yet beneath the accomplishments of her reign, Queen Victoria was a woman marked by personal loss and profound grief, a monarch who navigated the complexities of ruling an empire while grappling with her own inner turmoil. Her story is one of triumph and tragedy, of strength and vulnerability, and it remains a testament to the resilience of a queen who bore the weight of an empire on her shoulders, all while managing the grief of losing her beloved husband and navigating the transformative changes of the industrial world. Chapter 10. Queen Liliʻuokalani, Hawaii's last monarch. Queen Liliʻuokalani, the last reigning monarch of the Kingdom of Hawaii, remains one of the most poignant and revered figures in the history of the Pacific Islands. Her story is one of profound resilience, creativity, and resistance to overwhelming political forces. Liliʻuokalani was born on September 2, 1838, to high-ranking Hawaiian nobility, and from an early age she was prepared for a life of leadership. She became queen in 1891 after the death of her brother, King David Kalakaua. Her reign, however, was tragically short-lived, as she witnessed the destruction of the Hawaiian monarchy and the annexation of her kingdom by the United States. But her legacy endures, not only in her fight against imperialism, but also in the beauty of her compositions and her role as a symbol of Hawaiian culture and resistance. Growing up in Hawaii, Liliʻuokalani was steeped in the rich traditions of her people. The Hawaiian monarchy was an ancient and proud institution, deeply connected to the island's history, culture, and religion. Liliʻuokalani was well educated, and as a young woman, she was known for her intelligence and musical talent. She was an accomplished composer, writing numerous songs, hymns, and pieces of music, some of which would go on to become iconic pieces of Hawaiian culture. Her most famous composition, Aloha Ua, became a beloved anthem, representing the spirit of the islands and the emotional connection Hawaiians have with their land. Music and poetry were not just a means of personal expression for Liliʻuokalani. They were also tools for communicating the values of her kingdom and her people's deep connection to their heritage. Through her music, she was able to reflect the beauty of Hawaii and its traditions, even as the island faced mounting threats from outside forces. In 1891, Liliʻuokalani ascended to the throne after the passing of her brother, King Kalakaua, who had ruled Hawaii for over a decade. King Kalakaua's reign had been marked by a desire to preserve Hawaiian sovereignty in the face of increasing foreign influence, particularly from the United States. However, his efforts to assert the independence of the Kingdom of Hawaii were met with challenge. Many Americans, particularly those with economic interests in the islands, had long sought to annex Hawaii, and the political landscape of the time was growing increasingly hostile to Hawaiian self-rule. When Liliʻuokalani became queen, she inherited a kingdom that was already in the midst of political turmoil, where foreign powers and their influence were deeply entrenched in the islands. Her reign would prove to be a time of unprecedented political upheaval. Liliʻuokalani was determined to maintain Hawaii's independence and protect the sovereignty of her people. However, her attempts to strengthen the monarchy and push back against foreign influence were met with stiff resistance. The most significant challenge she faced came from the growing power of American business interests in Hawaii, particularly those associated with the sugar industry. By the late 19th century, American sugar plantation owners had gained immense influence over the Hawaiian economy and political system. They saw the Hawaiian monarchy as an obstacle to their power and sought to reduce its authority, ultimately leading to their support for the overthrow of Queen Liliʻuokalani's government. In January of 1893, a group of American and European businessmen, along with a contingent of U.S. Marines, staged a coup against Liliʻuokalani's government. They overthrew her monarchy, claiming that they were protecting American lives and property, despite the fact that the vast majority of Hawaiians were opposed to the coup. Liliʻuokalani, though devastated by the betrayal, remained calm and dignified in the face of the crisis. She was taken prisoner in her own palace, where she was held under house arrest. Her palace, which had once been a symbol of Hawaiian royal power, became a prison for the queen, and the once mighty monarchy was dismantled by forces much larger than the Hawaiian people. During her imprisonment, Liliʻuokalani was subjected to immense hardship. She was stripped of her royal title and forced to surrender her kingdom to the United States. However, she never abandoned her determination to seek justice for her people. Liliʻuokalani's imprisonment was a turning point in her life. While many would have been broken by such an injustice, she held on to her dignity and remained a symbol of resistance against the forces that sought to undermine her people's sovereignty. Even in the face of overwhelming adversity, Queen Liliʻuokalani never wavered in her conviction that Hawaii should remain an independent kingdom. She consistently worked for the restoration of her monarchy, appealing to the U.S. government and making her case before the American public. Though her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful in restoring Hawaii's independence, her bravery and perseverance would inspire future generations of Hawaiians to continue the fight for self-determination. In the years following her overthrow, Liliʻuokalani remained active in Hawaiian affairs and in advocating for the rights of her people. She wrote extensively, documenting her experiences and reflecting on the painful loss of her kingdom. Her autobiography, Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, published in 1898, became a powerful account of the events surrounding the overthrow and the annexation of Hawaii. Through her writing, Liliʻuokalani sought to ensure that the history of her kingdom and its monarchy would be remembered and that the dignity of her people would not be forgotten. In her later years, she became an advocate for the rights of native Hawaiians, working tirelessly to raise awareness about the injustices they had suffered under American rule. While Liliʻuokalani's efforts to regain the throne were unsuccessful, her legacy as a symbol of resistance and dignity endured long after her death. She was posthumously recognized as a key figure in the fight for Hawaiian sovereignty, and her story became an inspiration to many in the native Hawaiian community. Liliʻuokalani's life and struggles continue to resonate with those who seek to preserve Hawaiian culture and autonomy. Today, she is remembered not only as the last monarch of Hawaii, but also as a courageous leader who fought for the rights of her people, even in the face of immense personal loss and the overwhelming forces of imperialism. In addition to her political and social activism, Liliʻuokalani's contributions to Hawaiian music and culture have also left a lasting impact. As a composer, she crafted pieces that continue to be beloved and revered in Hawaii and beyond. Aloha'i, the song she wrote to bid farewell to a loved one, has become an anthem of Hawaii's spirit and resilience. Her music remains a reminder of the beauty and richness of Hawaiian culture, and her poetry reflects the profound connection she had to her land and her people. Through her artistic work, she ensured that the traditions of her kingdom would continue to thrive, even as political forces sought to erase them. Liliʻuokalani passed away in 1917, but her memory has never been forgotten. In the years since her death, she has been celebrated as a cultural icon and a symbol of resistance against colonialism. Efforts to restore Hawaiian sovereignty, though ongoing, have been influenced by her legacy, and her name is invoked in the struggle to preserve Hawaiian self-determination. Queen Liliʻuokalani remains a figure of immense respect and admiration, not just for her royal status, but for her unyielding courage in the face of injustice. Her reign may have been short-lived, but her impact on Hawaii and its people has endured for generations. Liliʻuokalani's story is one of a queen who loved her land, her people, and her heritage. It is the story of a monarch who, even when stripped of power and imprisoned in her own palace, never lost sight of her duty to her people. She remains a powerful symbol of the strength, beauty, and dignity of Hawaii, and her legacy continues to inspire those who fight for justice, sovereignty, and the preservation of culture. In the end, Queen Liliʻuokalani's true reign was not one defined by power over a kingdom, but by her unshakable commitment to the preservation of her people's rights, and her unwavering dignity in the face of adversity. Her life and her legacy remind us all of the enduring power of courage and conviction in the pursuit of justice. Chapter 11. Maria Theresa. The Habsburg Matriarch, Maria Theresa of Austria, was a woman of remarkable strength, intelligence, and compassion, who became one of the most significant monarchs in European history. Born in 1717, Maria Theresa ascended to the throne at a time when the Habsburg Empire, under the rule of her father Charles VII, was facing great challenges. The political climate was volatile, and the empire was surrounded by numerous enemies. When her father died in 1740, Maria Theresa, despite being a woman, inherited the throne of Austria, Bohemia, and Hungary, along with the vast Habsburg domains. Her succession was far from secure, as many European powers did not recognize the rights of a female ruler, leading to the War of the Austrian Succession, which would define much of her early reign. Yet despite these immense challenges, Maria Theresa would emerge as a powerful and successful ruler, leaving behind a legacy of profound political and social reforms, as well as a flourishing dynasty. Upon her father's death, Maria Theresa faced an immediate and daunting challenge. Not only did she inherit an empire in political turmoil, but many of the European powers were unwilling to accept a woman as the sovereign ruler of the Habsburg lands. The war that ensued, known as the War of the Austrian Succession, saw Austria pitted against Prussia, France, Spain, and other European powers. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Maria Theresa exhibited incredible political savvy and military strategy. She was a ruler who understood the gravity of the situation, and she took the reins of her military forces personally, overseeing key battles and mobilizing her allies with unmatched determination. Although the war ended with some territorial losses, Maria Theresa's strength in defending her throne earned her immense respect across Europe. It was clear to all who watched that this queen would not be easily defeated. Her reign, which spanned 4 decades, would be defined by her relentless focus on strengthening her empire and improving the lives of her subjects. Maria Theresa was a reformist monarch who worked tirelessly to modernize the Habsburg lands, particularly in military, educational, and financial matters. One of her first major reforms was the restructuring of the military. She understood that Austria's military forces were outdated and inadequate to defend her expansive domains. Maria Theresa took bold steps to modernize her army, incorporating new training techniques, expanding the size of the military, and introducing reforms that would make her forces more competitive on the European stage. Her military reforms helped ensure that Austria remained a formidable power in Europe, even as it faced external threats. Maria Theresa was also keenly aware of the need for social and economic reforms, especially in areas like taxation and education. She understood that a prosperous empire required an educated populace and a well-functioning economy. One of her most important reforms was the overhaul of the tax system. Previously, the tax burden in Austria had fallen disproportionately on the peasantry, and the nobility and clergy were often exempt from paying tax. Maria Theresa worked to change this by introducing more equitable tax policies, which, while unpopular with the nobility, helped to improve the financial health of the empire. She also introduced a system of government-provided welfare, aimed at supporting the poor and vulnerable members of society. These reforms helped lay the groundwork for a more modern state, capable of withstanding the challenges of the age. Her commitment to education was another hallmark of her reign. Maria Theresa believed that in order for her empire to thrive, her people needed to be educated and capable of contributing to the welfare of the state. She established a system of state-sponsored education, which provided schooling for children from all social classes. These reforms helped to reduce illiteracy and improve the overall quality of life in the empire. She also took steps to ensure that the Habsburg lands had a well-trained and efficient bureaucracy, which helped to carry out the reforms she championed and ensure that her policies were implemented effectively. In addition to her political and social reforms, Maria Theresa was deeply concerned with the welfare of her family. She was the mother of 16 children, many of whom would go on to become important figures in European history. Her most famous daughter was Marie Antoinette, who would later become the Queen of France. Despite the many challenges of ruling an empire, Maria Theresa was a loving and attentive mother, and she took a hands-on approach to her children's upbringing. She understood that her children, as heirs to the Habsburg throne, would play crucial roles in shaping the future of Europe. As a mother, Maria Theresa was both nurturing and strict, ensuring that her children were well educated and prepared for the responsibilities they would one day inherit. Her relationship with Marie Antoinette, in particular, would become a point of historical interest, as the French queen's tragic fate is so often juxtaposed with her mother's determined leadership. Despite the many reforms and changes she introduced, Maria Theresa never lost sight of the importance of compassion and empathy in leadership. She was known for her deep care for her subjects, particularly the poor and the vulnerable. She saw herself not just as a ruler, but as a mother figure to her people. Her compassion was evident in her welfare reforms, her education initiatives, and her approach to governance. Maria Theresa's leadership was grounded in a strong moral code, and she believed that rulers should work for the good of their people, not for personal gain. This belief in the welfare of her people made her immensely popular, both within her court and across her empire. However, Maria Theresa was not without her critics. Many of her reforms, especially the taxation changes and the curbing of aristocratic privileges, met with resistance from the nobility and clergy. The reform of the military and the introduction of new taxes were deeply unpopular with the upper classes. But Maria Theresa was resolute in her commitment to strengthening the empire and improving the lives of her subjects. She faced down her critics with a combination of tact and firmness, ensuring that her reforms were carried out even in the face of resistance. Maria Theresa's reign also saw the expansion of Austrian influence in Europe. She skillfully navigated the complex political landscape of 18th-century Europe, forging strategic alliances with powerful countries like Russia, Britain, and Prussia. She was a shrewd diplomat, often securing peace treaties and military alliances that would benefit her empire. One of her most significant achievements was her ability to preserve Austria's position as a major European power, even as the balance of power on the continent shifted throughout her reign. Maria Theresa's legacy is one of reform, resilience, and maternal strength. Though she faced immense challenges throughout her life, she always rose to meet them with determination and intelligence. She left behind a transformed empire, with a modernized military, a more equitable tax system, and a stronger economy. Her children would go on to influence European history in significant ways, and her reign set the stage for future Habsburg rulers. Today, she is remembered not only for her political acumen and military reforms, but also for her deep love for her family and her people. Her story is one of a monarch who balanced the demands of governance with the tenderness of a mother, leading with both strength and compassion. Maria Theresa passed away in 1780, after a reign of 40 years. Her death marked the end of an era for the Habsburg monarchy, but her legacy lived on in the policies she introduced, and the children she left behind. Her life and reign continue to inspire admiration for the leadership and vision of a woman who, against the odds, became one of the most successful rulers in European history. Her name will forever be synonymous with strength, wisdom, and a profound commitment to the welfare of her people, making her one of the most remarkable queens in history. Chapter 12. Zenobia, the Desert Queen of Palmyra. Zenobia, the Desert Queen of Palmyra, remains one of history's most remarkable and formidable figures. Her story is a tale of ambition, bravery, and defiance. A story of a woman who rose from the desert sands to challenge the might of the Roman Empire. Zenobia was born in the early 3rd century CE into the royal family of Palmyra, an ancient and prosperous city in Syria. Palmyra, known for its strategic location along the trade routes between the east and west, was a powerful city-state that had enjoyed a degree of autonomy under the Romans. While the empire had been dominant in the Mediterranean, Palmyra's rulers, including Zenobia's ancestors, had managed to maintain a degree of independence, often navigating the delicate political balance between Rome and the surrounding powers. It was within this world that Zenobia would rise to prominence, an ambitious queen who would defy Roman authority and challenge the empire in ways that would make her one of the most unforgettable figures of her time. Zenobia became queen in 2067 CE, following the death of her husband, King Odaenathus, who had been the ruler of Palmyra. After his death, Zenobia assumed control of the kingdom, ruling as regent for her young son Vabalathus, whom she hoped to position as the next king. Yet, Zenobia was no mere regent. She was a forceful and determined leader in her own right. Under her rule, Palmyra flourished. Zenobia's reign was marked by a period of expansion and military conquest that would astonish the world. She demonstrated a keen strategic mind and the ability to command armies, setting the stage for a bold campaign against Rome itself. What made Zenobia's leadership even more impressive was her extraordinary intelligence and understanding of politics. She was highly educated, well-versed in the classical languages of Greek and Latin, and had a deep appreciation for the cultures and philosophies of both the East and the West. It was said that she could speak several languages fluently, which made her not only a skilled diplomat, but also a powerful voice in her own court. Zenobia's intellectual prowess matched her political ambition. She was not content to rule Palmyra alone. She envisioned an empire that could rival that of Rome itself. This was an audacious dream, yet she had the conviction to pursue it with unyielding determination. One of Zenobia's most ambitious moves was her conquest of Egypt. At the time, Egypt was a Roman province, a key territory that the empire relied upon for resources, especially grain. In 2070 CE, Zenobia's forces launched an invasion of Egypt, and after a series of well-executed military campaigns, she managed to conquer the region. The fall of Egypt to Zenobia's forces was a stunning blow to Rome. The empire, already grappling with internal divisions and external threats, had not anticipated such a bold challenge from a seemingly small kingdom in the desert. Zenobia's victory in Egypt not only bolstered her power, but also threatened Rome's grip on the eastern Mediterranean. By taking Egypt, Zenobia effectively placed herself at the heart of an empire that could rival Rome's influence in the region. She now controlled a vast swath of land, stretching from Palmyra through Syria, Judea, and Egypt, with ambitions to extend her influence further. Her conquest of Egypt was just the beginning. Zenobia's ambitions grew even bolder as she proclaimed her son Vabalathus as the King of Kings and began to assert her sovereignty over all of the eastern Roman provinces. She sought to create a new empire, one that was independent of Rome, with its own power base and legitimacy. In doing so, she presented a direct challenge to Roman authority, declaring her intention to replace Rome as the dominant power in the Mediterranean. For a time, it seemed as though Zenobia might actually succeed in her quest to build an empire that could rival Rome. Her conquests, military victories, and ability to unite diverse regions under her rule were remarkable, and many within her empire rallied around her vision of an independent Palmyran realm. However, Zenobia's growing power did not go unnoticed in Rome. The Roman Emperor Aurelian, who had already been dealing with a number of threats to the empire's stability, recognized the danger Zenobia posed to Roman dominance in the east. In 2072 CE, Aurelian launched a military campaign to bring Palmyra and Zenobia's forces back under Roman control. What followed was a dramatic confrontation between the forces of Rome and Palmyra. Zenobia, confident in her military prowess and the strength of her army, resisted the Roman advance with all the resources at her disposal. For months, the two sides clashed in a series of battles, with the fate of Palmyra hanging in the balance. Despite her leadership in military strategies, Zenobia's forces were eventually overwhelmed by the might of the Roman legion. In 2073 CE, the Romans captured Palmyra after a siege, and Zenobia was forced to surrender. The queen, who had once defied Rome with such audacity, was now captured by Emperor Aurelian himself. The capture of Zenobia marked the end of Palmyra's brief period of independence. She was paraded in a Roman triumph, an extravagant celebration of Rome's victory over one of its most formidable opponents. However, Zenobia's fate after her capture remains a subject of historical debate. Some sources suggest that she was executed, while others claim that she was allowed to live in exile. Regardless of the outcome, Zenobia's defeat by Aurelian did not erase her legacy as a brilliant and courageous leader. Even in defeat, Zenobia's legacy and her story has captured the imagination of generations, and she is remembered not only for her military exploits, but also for her role in challenging one of the most powerful empires in history. Her bravery, intelligence, and resolve made her a symbol of resistance and strength. Zenobia's legacy has inspired countless writers, artists, and thinkers over the centuries. Her name is synonymous with defiance, with the courage to stand up to overwhelming forces and fight for one's vision of the world, no matter how impossible it may seem. Zenobia's reign, although short-lived, was a testament to the power of a single individual to challenge the course of history. She ruled a powerful Syrian empire for a brief moment in time, but her accomplishments have left a lasting imprint on history. Her victory in Egypt, her challenge to Roman authority, and her leadership during a time of crisis marked her as one of the most brilliant and courageous figures of the ancient world. The desert queen of Palmyra may have been captured by the Romans, but her story of defiance and ambition lives on, a reminder of the power of a single woman to shape the course of history. Zenobia's place in history is secure not only because of her military successes and her challenge to Rome, but also because of the legacy she left behind as a woman who defied the norms of her time and rose to power in a world dominated by men. She is remembered as a brilliant strategist, a bold conqueror, and a queen whose vision extended beyond the boundaries of her desert kingdom. Zenobia's story continues to inspire those who dare to challenge the status quo, who dream of a different world, and who believe in the possibility of rewriting history through courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve.